I want to continue talking about my top leadership lessons. Over the years, I've taught leadership overseas and in America and at the church here, as well as studied it. I'm a John Maxwell associate, and so I've studied a lot of leadership, and then I've taken all of that information and just said, biblically, what are the most important things that I feel like I have learned and actually been able to use from the Bible? So we talked about encounter, the fact that you've got to first encounter the Lord and have a personal relationship. That's the most important thing. Your ministry never precedes your relationship with God. He called 12 disciples that they might be with him, and then he sent them out to preach. So relationship always precedes ministry. Then the second thing is calling. We use Moses as an example where God came to him in the burning bush and said, here's what I want you to do. I've seen the need of the people in Israel, or in Egypt rather. I want you to go out and get Israel out of there, get the nation of Israel from Egypt, deliver them from slavery. Told him what to do, and he mostly said, this is your calling. And so many people in the Bible have resisted their calling. Jeremiah said, I'm too young. Gideon said, I'm not famous enough. Deborah said, I'm a woman. Moses said, I can't talk. And so the whole point is, once you respond to that calling, it gets to the third thing that I think is really important, which is what I'll call vision or purpose. You could probably call it all sorts of different things, but it is specifically, what is it that you are supposed to do? Once you've encountered the Lord, once you know that you're called to do a certain thing, the next obvious question is, what is that? What does that look like? Now, let me tell you right up front, you're not going to get the whole picture. There's always going to be steps that you wish you knew, things that you wish you knew that haven't been clear yet. You got to start the process. We walk by faith. You begin the process, but you've got to say, what is it that I'm aiming for? And I would say, write it down. Someone said petition, or the prayer petition means to write it down. It's so important that you write the vision so that others who read it can run with it. And so you just got to start the process. Start with a piece of paper and say, this is what I would like to see. And then clarify it and refine it and cut stuff out and add stuff. Give it some time. Talk to some people that you trust that are not going to, throw it away on you. You got to be careful there, because Joseph told some people about his vision, and it was bad timing. He should have kept that to himself. Mary, on the other hand, treasured some things in her heart. So be careful about who you share with, but be okay with people that you trust helping you to refine the vision. So just start. And I'm going to use the example in Genesis 11 of the Tower of Babel. The people had a wrong motive, but they had a right method. The method that they used to begin to build the Tower of Babel could be put in any business enterprise and be successful. They had good communication. They had one purpose. They were one people. They spoke the same language. They were communicating. They were all aiming at the same thing. All of the things were in place, except they missed the most important thing, which is the will of God. They left out God's purpose, and they said, let's make a name for ourselves. And so I'm going to read this, but you got to keep in mind the fact that they didn't do the most important thing. It says, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. This is Genesis 11. This is 3, verse 3. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let's build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. That's the purpose. They were going to build a tower. They were going to build something that made a name for themselves, and that's the bad news. It says, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So what happened was, they did the right method with the wrong motive. What if you did the same thing with the right method and the right motive? In other words, you said, God, what is it that you want me to do? For instance, I have been the pastor of a local church as well as a missionary for over 40 years. But I've been at this church as a pastor for 38 years. We jokingly say, I didn't plan to stay this long. But the other side of it is this. There is a gift and a purpose in me that God gave me for this community, and it's really been vivid in my heart. The vision, the purpose, the calling has all been there. And so as long as God is in it, it's amazing how He helps you bring it to pass. If you got to do it yourself, it's like, the difference between you climbing a hill, and then we use the example when you're skiing, the old-fashioned way was there was like a chain that went up the hill and you hooked on, and then it just pulled you up the hill. So God can pull you up the hill, or you can pedal your way up. But it's going to work a lot better if you say, God, what is it you want? And how do we proceed to do the thing that you've called us to do? If that's a local church, what should it look like? How much of this can you put on paper and think about and focus? You know, it's like looking through a camera. You see the vision, but it's real fuzzy. These are the old-fashioned cameras, by the way, where you look through and you see the picture, but it's fuzzy. And then you start to turn the dial in the front, and it begins to focus. And you keep turning that until it's very clear. But you got to start somewhere. Some people want it to be clear at step one. It's usually not. You just start in the process. You aim at something. You know, if it's being overseas as a missionary, if it's starting a business, whatever it is, write down and think through, what do you think God is telling you to do? What do you want this to look like? It's okay to take a piece of paper and say, in my lifetime, I'd like to see this. In 10 years, I'd like to see this. In 5 years, I'd like to see this. Here's the key, though. You can write tomorrow in ink pen, but you've got to write next week in pencil. You've got to be willing to adjust. As you start this process and this vision, you've got to be willing to admit that you may not know it all at first, and you might even have some things wrong in the beginning. That's okay. Just start walking by faith. You know, someone said it's hard to steer a parked car. You've got to get in traffic and start moving. And as you're moving, God will direct you. God will say, here's what I want you to do. God told Moses to bring the people of Israel out of Egypt. He did, but he couldn't take them into the promised land. And then Joshua was told to take the people into the promised land. And so there's a specific purpose that God has for your life. It's interesting, it says when David had fulfilled God's purpose in his generation, he fell asleep. So the generation, the culture is always changing, but God has a specific purpose for you in your generation. And you know what? If you will ask him, he will tell you. If you want to know, ask God. If you lack wisdom, the Bible says, ask God. He'll give it liberally. Sit down, especially if you're married, with your spouse and say, what is it that we feel like God is telling us to do? Not just, here are my goals, here's what I'd like to see happen, but what is God directing me to do in the future? So have an encounter with God, make sure you've made your calling and election sure, and then start the process. What is it that I'm supposed to do? What does God want to do through my life?